Welcome to tonight's episode of the Iron Sysadmin Podcast. And a little bit of paranoia. I'm your host, Nate. Welcome to the Iron Sysadmin. Joining me tonight are Charles and Marc, and a special guest, Chuck Gehman. So, say hello, everybody, and Chuck, let us know what are you here to talk about?
Hello, everybody.
Hey.
Hi.
So, Chuck is an author. You guys reached out to me to see about having a spot on the show to talk about a book that you have coming out, and he's also quite well-versed in a certain subject that our viewers might actually enjoy. So, you want to talk just a little bit about who you are, Chuck, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Thank you. I've got a new book coming out. It's called AWS Cloud Formation in Action. It's published by Manning Publications. It's actually in their preview program. It's called the MEAP program, the Manning Early Adopter Program. So you can actually go get the book today. 5 chapters of it are out in the MEAP, which is a really nice ebook format. And what you can do there, as so many of us like to do, is you can make comments and suggestions on what I've written about cloud formation, which is really cool, and hopefully learn something from what I wrote too while you're doing that. But so I've been using AWS since 2012-ish, back then cloud formation, which is an infrastructure as code tool, wasn't as powerful as it is now. There were other tools like Ansible. I know you guys talk about Red Hat all the time. Ansible is a tool that many people would call, infrastructure as code. And there's Puppet and Chef, which are also sort of, in the same neighborhood. And now there's Terraform, which has just taken the world by storm, as something named Terraform probably should do. And, if you like that episode of Star Trek, right? The first
Give
one.
me the secret of Genesis!
And then there's a new one called Pulumi, which we can talk about if you'd like to a little bit. That's
Bloomy?
Gloomy.
Oh,
Right.
gloomy. I heard bloomy, and I'm thinking Tobias Fuke from Arrested Development.
Those were the P. P is in palm.
Like a plume of something. I get it.
Yeah, Pulumi. And I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right because I've never had anybody actually say it to me. But
like so many things in IT.
Exactly. But it's like there's a new thing in CloudFormation called the CDK that actually has a lot in common with this Pulumi thing. And Pulumi's, why it's become so popular very, very quickly, which is why a lot of people haven't heard of it, is that you use whatever your favorite languages are to write infrastructure as code instead of having to learn JSON or YAML, or like Terraform uses this HCL thing. So that was kind of a big ramble. I work for Perforce, which is on my vest, and I'm wearing this not to plug my company, but because it's freezing cold in this basement that I'm in right now, where my home office is.
Look, I can wear a vest to prop my company too. Okay.
Excellent. I'm a technical marketing engineer and cloud specialist for Perforce. And if you don't know who Perforce is, we're actually a version control system provider at our core foundation. Been around since 1995. Us and SVN replaced CVS. If you've ever heard any of these.
Yeah, I think there's
I
probably
cut my teeth on CVS.
Yeah, there's probably
I don't miss it.
Probably all of us on this show will remember CVS. Marc, do you remember CVS? You have to remember CVS.
So I'm a terrible programmer. I haven't actually written code since the Apple II and then early IBM PC days, before version control was a thing. Like version control was your notebook that you scrolled stuff down on, or the the Computer World magazine you were typing the code in from.
Yeah, for me it was like the printouts sitting in the
Right.
paper box that I grabbed.
The
right?
printout was awesome. It was on the green bar, and you throw it out across the room.
That's right.
You felt like you were a powerful Mondo nerd.
No, I can remember early on in my Linux days having to pull things from CVS because like they weren't packaged in a way yet. They were still things that were under development.
Right.
That's my exposure to CVS, and SVN came on very quickly after that because we're talking late 90s, early 2000s.
I think when I was at Merck, first getting into Linux, giving me money, right? They want to pay me money for knowing Linux. One of those version control setups, and I don't remember because I'm old. Our web team used that, and it was hosted on Linux, if I recall.
Right.
So we grew up, back in 1995 on Unix, right?
Maybe it was on Unix. It was probably Unix.
Yeah. Sun and, all the other Unixes, BSD. We ran on DECVAX computers and things like that, if anybody's ever heard of those.
HPUX?
Yeah.
Yep, for sure. Very agnostic to what Unix distribution it was. And then, of course, moved to Linux. And we run on Windows now as well. But the company has continued to evolve the software. And, today, most people don't even know that there's any other version control than Git, right? Which is pretty fascinating. But of course, a lot of the people that are in the industry have not been in it. They've only been in since Linux existed, and Git came around just shortly after Linux, really. But we are popular today, and we're actually growing in popularity because, first of all, our primary target market is game development. So AAA game studios, companies like Epic that are our largest customers, as well as people making hardware and software, because we can version anything. In fact, that used to be our motto, version anything. So you can put your hardware designs into our system. You can put your movies. Companies like Pixar use us, Samsung, Intel.
You can version control my bourbon. Yes,
absolutely. So the Genesis code from Star Trek could be
Genesis.
There you go.
So let me ask you.
Once.
Let me ask you something, Chuck.
Yeah.
So with the prevalence of Git, for instance, I'm not really a programmer, although I've used Git for some stuff. Okay, I'm a crappy Ruby programmer nowadays when I do anything. But I can't speak for anybody else, but it seems I'm not alone in having almost a love-hate relationship with Git because it's there. It's fairly simple to consume it. And then once you start like using it as a programmer and stuff, it seems to be real easy to step into landmines. How does your product like differ? Is it a better quality of life experience?
Yeah, very much so. It's much easier to use, actually. But it's also, we have 1 million command line arguments as well, so you can be happy if you love, arcane, really long commands that do, 90 different things, but you'll also succeed with us if you're not that enamored of it and you just want to get your work done. So that's why in the game world, code and non-code contributors are equal citizens in the game dev community, right? And so they can all use our system, and we have ways of helping them also. Like we have a Windows Explorer plugin that you can right click and version control things, right? In a window, in a file window, right? You can use our visual client. You can use your favorite IDE. We're integrated into Visual Studio Code. So and then we're also integrated with the Unreal Engine, Unreal Studio. So those people who are creating 3D models and, animation frameworks and blueprints, they can also be in our system without it getting in the way of the work that they're doing, right?
Right, and Unreal is one of the big boys nowadays.
Yes, yeah, it's huge. And then we work with the other big 3D game engine / modeling tool is Unity, and we work with them too. So, and we work with a bunch of game engines. So.
Nice.
But and then semiconductor is another really big area, and the chips are all designed basically with sort of a not a procedural language, but and I'm not even sure I'd call it a declarative language, but they're written. It's basically code. The way they design the chips, it's not like on a CAD system like it used to be, although some analog chips are still designed that way. But there are millions of files. They're very large files. Those are the things that we excel at. And there was a time when people thought that the distributed version control system, DVCS, that Git created, pioneered, was very important. But like, I went to a DevOps meetup back when we were going to actual meetups live last year.
In the before time.
I remember those.
I remember those days.
Before the dark times, before the empire.
And eating snacks with other people off of a table. And this guy was talking about Git and open source, and he really kind of conflated the two. And then as he spoke, I realized, wow, so it's really GitHub that he's in love with, right? Because of the incredible community and where open source lives. And he was telling people things about Git and mistakes that he made in Git, because it is very, very possible in a lot of environments to just ruin everybody else's work on your team. And we make it a little bit harder to do that. We have better security, but and I don't want to speak, I'm not speaking against Git, because we also support Git. Also, you can use Git inside of our server, but we're a server, right? And with the cloud, what's happened is we do charge for our software, which a lot of people don't like. Red Hat guys are definitely into that, which is good. So we're kindred spirits on that.
You should be able to make money with software, right?
Yeah.
It's the closed model that us Red Hat guys have a problem with.
Yeah. I like to not call it proprietary. I like to call it commercial. We charge, but so with us, our server, until fairly recently, it's very compact. It's written in C. It is very fast, extremely fast, and it almost could still fit on a floppy disk, incredibly, right?
Wow.
If you know what a floppy disk is, again.
Which kind of floppy? The actual floppies or the hard 3.5-inch ones?
Yeah. How small are we talking here?
I was going to say, if they can fit 5 1/4, I'm really impressed.
The crunchy ones. But
ones,
with us, you can have as many servers as you want. And as you can imagine, with things like infrastructure as code and just the cloud itself, now it's so easy to spin up servers and configure them.
One would almost say too easy.
It's been kind of a boon for us, because now, like with the everybody moving out of the office to working from home, right? We have this idea called an edge server. Today, edge computing is a big thing. Mm-hmm. We've had this edge server for quite some time, and it allowed people to move all their stuff to the cloud, put edge servers where they need it to be, where their people are sitting, not in an office anymore, crank up the bandwidth, and continue to work. So that's been a lot of what I've been doing with our customers for the last 110 days or whatever it's been.
That's pretty cool.
So I think that's my deep background.
Yeah. So we sort of rabbit trailed into talking about your company and the place you call it your company. Is it just the place you work, or do you have an actual stake in this place? Okay.
I work there. Actually, it was founded by one guy, an engineer. He sold it in 2016 to private equity. We have become a platform for acquisition of other really interesting companies like static code analysis tools and agile project management tools and testing tools, mobile and web testing. And so yeah, I'm an employee there. I work for the version control system business, though, the core business that was the original acquisition. And the company's grown tremendously. The headquarters was moved from San Francisco to Minneapolis, which is really interesting. I live in Minneapolis. And yeah, my boss will appreciate me talking about the company, so I can't. But people don't know who we are, you know.
Right. Well, no, I'd honestly never heard of you, and that's you know, for as long as I've been in IT. I mean, they're talking 20-something years that I've been in this field, and I'd never heard of you. I've never been in game design, right? I've also never been a software developer, so maybe that's why.
I play a lot of games.
I play a lot of games, right? So
I could use version control for my Roll20 campaign, I think, sometime.
There you go. You should totally do that. So where can people find, you said it's Perforce, right? I'm trying to read your...
It's www.perforce.com if you want to check us out. It's pretty interesting.
Add that into the show notes so that if anybody's curious, you can go check that out.
Excellent.
Even though that wasn't necessarily where we were going with this conversation, but hey, useful information for folks in the IT world. So I guess let's go back and talk at least briefly about your book.
You know,
definitely do that because Manny will appreciate that too, and so will I.
So I really like this. Like I'll admit when I started chatting with you guys and you gave me the code that I could go download the book, I was sort of confused at how this whole thing was laid out. Like, why is it only 4? I only got 4 chapters at the time. You said it's 5 now. Yeah. Like, why is that, and what does that mean? Like, do I get the whole book later? That kind of thing. So, and what I've come to understand through chatting with you, and I guess your publishing person.
Mila.
The concept here is that if you buy the book now, if you like buy it at like normal full price, you only get the first 5 chapters, but then as the book is finished, those chapters come to you. So it's like a work in progress sort of deal.
Every month you'll get a new chapter, right? So I'm working on 6 now. It's like coming down to the wire. I've got like another week-ish to complete it, and then they'll take about a week or so to, you know, make my graphics look less ugly and do the layout, and you know, they do a really nice job. The books are very awesome, and there are other books that people might be interested in, obviously, in the program. And that at least one of the codes you got, I think, works with any of the books, and they always have sales. They're having a big 4th of July sale. So,
right.
But yeah, so it's great. So I've written 5 chapters. I've got a great editor who I talk to every week. You know, we have an hour-long conference call to talk about the challenges I'm going through and what I've written. You know, there are multiple reviews by a panel of experts who, you know, when I did the first 3 chapters, I had that review with those folks, and I got so much incredible feedback. I mean, some of them were like, you know, one of the questions, I was like sweating bullets for like a week while this was happening, this review panel. It was, you know, some of them were like, one of the questions was, on the Amazon scale of, you know, 0 to 5 stars, what would you give this book at this point, you know? And I'm like,
can you rate your own work, please? I always hate those questions.
So I'm like, whoa, you know, this is scary. And so some people gave it a 4, but then they also provided like 3 pages of suggestions to make it better. And and that was there were 16 people, and you know, there were a couple of haters in there who, you know, didn't like me or my writing style, but for the most part, they were very, very good reviews. But then all this feedback, the detail of which I wasn't really expecting, and so that just makes me a better writer, tightens up the material. You know, I'll go back and upgrade it, and you can do the same thing in the MEAP. There's like chat. I'm in there. I get notified when anybody puts something in there. So if they don't understand something, they can ask a question, or if they find a problem with it. Somebody, you know, found out, you know, noticed that one of the GitHub URLs was messed up in like one of the first 3 chapters. And they were like, hey, you should fix this. And I'm like, yeah,
it's a good thing. It's also a hard thing to put into print. The number of times I've come across a printed technical book with a URL to something, and then you try to go to it and it's not there anymore, or it's moved or whatever, and it's like, well, now what do I do?
Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah.
And so the manning process really means that, the book will be, I think it says like the beginning of 2021, right? When it's going to be in print form, when it'll be on Amazon as a paperback. And when that happens, it's really, really good at that point, right? There's no question that, everybody's going to like it. Everybody's going to benefit from it because it's just been, an iterative process, which is really...
So that review process that you were talking about, is that something that happens each time you release a chapter, or is that left up to the folks who have access to it to go and give you feedback?
They give me feedback. I have one technical editor who reads it. So I have my development editor who, goes through and makes sure, it's grammatically not stupid, and I haven't, done half sentences, and
I need one of those
like that. In haste,
for every email I write.
Just for when you're talking.
Exactly. Leaving out words and having too many words in certain places, but then the technical editor also gives it a very, fine-tooth comb walkthrough. Then it goes into the MEAP, and then it gets laid out. Then it goes into the MEAP, and the layout people probably notice things too. And then the MEAP people comment on it, and then my next big review with that, panel is after chapter 9. So it'll be, actually the deadline's pretty tight on that. So it'll probably be in August, the beginning of August. So we'll have 9 chapters out there.
So it just goes through this review process over and over again. Plus you get actual feedback from people who are reading the book, which is good. So
sounds very open sourcey.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really kind of is. Except, well, you're paying for it, but it's it's
right. But
it's a good deal.
It's free as in speech, not free as in speech.
Yeah, you're definitely, people. Well, one of the things I think people love about open source is, the contributions they're making and what it does for their career and the things they learn. All of those things I think are important aspects of it, in addition to, just pure altruism. And I think a lot of those things come through with this too. You're helping make the book better for everybody. You're proving how much you know. Some of the people that reviewed the book, they probably could write the book, right? And in the review panel, but they didn't sign up to write the book. They didn't, go to Manning with the idea and proposal, and we iterated the proposal a bunch of times to make sure that the book would be useful for people also before I even started writing it.
Right.
We fleshed it out, the chapters and the topics, so that makes sense.
Good. So you mentioned a discount code. We do have a discount code. I neglected to write down what the percentage off you guys gave us was in my show notes here. The discount code is...
Let's assume it was good.
Yeah, it was totally great.
I'm guessing it's 20% because it's Pod Iron Sys 20.
Well, 20 could be the year. I don't know. But yes, it's Pod Iron Sys 20. It's in the show notes. I will look up the percentage because I'm a terrible podcast host and didn't write it down.
Terrible. So, why we put up with your shenanigans, lady?
Yeah, I don't know. It's because I'm the one that's running OBS. That's why you put up with my shenanigans. And
You're the one with the soundboard.
I have the YouTube. And I'm the one with the soundboard.
He's not wrong.
So we also have what you guys referred to as preview codes that we can give out, which I think gets you a limited time full access to the MEAP version of the book. Is that correct? Did I understand that right?
Yes. Yeah, so you'll have it for 2 months. So you'll definitely see through chapter 6 and probably chapter 7 if you activate it.
Right.
Now.
And they're good. I think they're good until the end of July, if I remember correctly. So if anybody listening wants to hear, so I think the code is good till the end of July. I don't know how. I guess that's the point that the timer starts on your access to the book. I don't know.
Right.
So if anybody out there listening to the show wants to get a preview of this book and get access to it for at least a short time to determine whether maybe you want to buy it or not, which you could then later buy it with the the promo code, let us know, because I thought about ways to sort of give these away, but I think the best way is to just give them to people who want it. So the first, I think we have 5 codes. So the first 5 people who send an email to podcast@ironsysadmin.com, or reach out to me. If you want to reach out to me on Twitter, or us on Twitter, I should say, or Facebook, just do so. And when I'm out of codes, I'm out of codes. Simple as that.
Let us know.
There you go.
Send you a code. Come on, you knew it was coming at some point.
Well, yes, I did.
Well, one thing I could do, if we have a few more minutes, is walk through the table of contents real quick and tell you what you're
sure. Learn. Go right ahead. We've got all the time you need. As long as we don't go on for 3 hours or something, that's plenty. That's good with me.
Excellent.
I wanted to cover the book part, and then I figured we'll talk a little more about infrastructure as code in general
because books
after we
have covers.
Cover up. Yeah. Yes, right, because books have covers.
Yep.
But we're good. I've got bourbon left, so
excellent.
We got time.
So the it starts out by I mentioned a few of the infrastructure as code tools that are popular at the beginning of the podcast, and so that's the first chapter, is we compare them and sort of talk about the pros and cons, and I'm not going to tell you that CloudFormation is good for every application, right? If you're running Red Hat servers on premises, it may well it's totally not the right tool for you to use for infrastructure as code, because the primary use case for it is AWS, right? It's an AWS native tool. It's free. You don't pay for it. You just pay for the AWS resources. So that's sort of a weakness and a strength of it. In the past, it took AWS time to support new features. They release new features and products and services constantly, so many of them, that they struggled to keep up with those new things. In CloudFormation now, it's a first-class citizen in AWS, and it's almost in real time or days later that CloudFormation supports the things that they're releasing. So that's chapter 1. Chapter 2 then talks about how it works, because it's all these tools have unique functionality, and it talks about the JSON and YAML templates that you use to create your infrastructure code to deploy. They're called templates, and they deploy stacks in AWS. And then we get into creating, updating, and deleting the stack lifecycle. We get into in chapter 5. Actually, in chapter 4, we actually use CloudFormation to build a website with auto scaling and load balancing. So fully functional website deployed. Chapter 5 goes into much greater detail on managing changes to templates, talks about ways to modularize your infrastructure code and to work with teams. It doesn't really get into a lot of DevOps topics, because they're covered later in the book. In chapter 8, there's a whole section on DevOps and pipelines and infrastructure as code. Chapter I'm working on now, chapter 6 that I mentioned will be out in the MEAP in a couple of weeks, is it's deploying globally. So it talks about the AWS Route 53 DNS system, and this thing they call organizations, stack sets, and AWS config. All 3 tools are for managing an enterprise deployment at scale, whether you do it from the console or whether you do it from CloudFormation. We'll be doing it with CloudFormation. And this chapter, actually, you can do all these things from the console with CloudFormation. You can do it from the CLI, and you can do it from APIs. And so in this chapter, we're actually primarily using the CLI. And then later we'll talk about monitoring performance, containers, serverless. I mentioned the cloud development kit, the CDK that lets you use other languages. That's a chapter. I think people will find that really exciting. I mean, back when we envisioned this book, which was last fall, CDK has just blown up since then, right? I mean, we actually, the editors wondered, they asked, hey, should we talk about the CDK back then? And I was like, yeah, we should. And now it's like, there's so many blogs about it that weren't out then,
My colleague and I were at the reInvent event in New York last August when, CDK had already existed, but it was when, I think that was when they announced that, okay, this is like actually out there for people to use.
Yeah.
And we've been using it ever since. And that's been very interesting because it is changing very quickly.
Yeah.
Lots of releases, deprecations, and that's fine. But you really just have to run to just to stay in place with that and just to like keep current with it. But
yeah,
it's been very cool to play with.
Yeah, I feel that way about AWS in general. You've got to be running all the time. But yeah, I mean, a community is forming around it, an incredibly robust community, and people are doing things that I think AWS probably never even imagined with it. I mean, there's a guy who's generating Terraform code with it. You can. It's pretty crazy.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah. So because there's this JavaScript engine in it that generates the code, and he's just hacked the heck out of it. It's pretty amazing. So anyway, that was the quicker than the discussion of Perforce probably, but yeah, get the book and check it out, especially if you want to learn cloud formation. Obviously, it's a good skill. There's a lot of demand if you're on a career path and you want to know how to do cool things. And most of the examples in the book are either able to be done in the free tier, right? So if you just go to AWS and sign up for an account, there are a few things, I warn everybody in all the examples, terminate this, kill off the stack, delete the stack when you're done doing this, because there are a few things that, necessarily will cost money if you leave them running. But if you leave them running for a day or two, because you forgot to turn them off after a long evening of, going through examples in the book, it's going to cost you $1. It's not going to cost you,
Right, but if you leave it on for a month,
it's going to cost
you. Turn the lights off when you leave the room.
30, 40, $50, right, for that inexpensive instance, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to be much more than that. So yeah.
So I mean, it's good that you have the forethought to mention that. So you mentioned that in the book. Don't forget to turn this off.
Yeah, very much so.
That's good. That's good because it's most quick and dirty how-tos. They don't care. They're just like, here, do this thing on AWS, and then especially if you're new to it, you may not have that comprehension that what is this going to cost me, right?
Yeah, the book example is all build it, deploy it, change it, delete it.
There you go.
And, one of the things you talk about, and I think it's really important, especially for people who maybe haven't had to think this way before, is the fact that cloud formation is declarative. So there is, unless you actually had some kind of persistent data, like database uploads or whatever, it's fine to delete it because as long as you still have the template, you can just redeploy it and it'll be just same as it ever was.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the point,
you have to be. Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
You have to be comfortable with the idea of destroying your environment deliberately.
There's great repeatability, and it's once you get used to it, it feels good. Deleting it.
Right. Getting back at these computers for all the frustration they've caused us over decades.
So that's a
nuke.
That's a good segue into sort of a broader discussion. But I did have one question, and maybe you touched on this while you were going on about the table of contents of the book. About how long do you think it's going to be when it's done? Not time-wise, but how many chapters you think it'd be? And do you have some rough arc of what else is going to be covered?
Yeah, it's 12 chapters, and I think I went through pretty much what we're going to talk about. I mean, the APIs, the serverless, the containers, it kind of goes from really easy to harder and harder,
Okay.
But the examples are all very accessible. It's not, I feel like my goal has been to fill in a lot of the blanks. With a blog, you see a little piece of things. There's only one other book about cloud formation. Even some of the people that were using cloud formation in the first preview, in the first 3 chapters, there were things that I talked about that they actually didn't know, which was extremely gratifying to me. But
only one other book, huh? Because only one other book, because I think I first used AWS when I was back at Merck, and that was probably, so that would have meant it was more like 7 or 8 years ago, and I remember cloud formation being a thing. So
it's been around for quite some time. I mean, it's been around since 2012. So but as far as the total length, it's going to be around. The guesstimate is 350 pages.
Okay.
And plus or minus. I mean, there's an exercise that we go through called the weighted table of contents, and it's like how long do you think this is going to be, and how hard is it going to be for you to write?
Yeah, that's a good question to ask at the beginning.
It's really good.
I was going to say, it sounds like sprint planning.
Yeah, so it was way over 400 at the beginning, and I've managed to be perhaps not as verbose as I could be, and so right now it's tracking at like 400, but I may end up hitting that 350 mark or a little higher. We'll see. Yeah.
Chuck, I got to tell you, you're going to have to add at least 2 more spaces in the book at this point.
Yeah.
Because in the section under Ansible, Red Hat needs a space between red and hat.
Oh, no.
2 places.
Oh, man.
I'm that guy.
Somebody probably caught it, actually.
Well, they caught it 2 paragraphs later. Because Red Hat has a space, but they didn't catch it in the second paragraph.
I mean, to be frank, our own logo didn't have the space until about a year ago when they rebranded. So.
Well, that's the IBM difference. IBM pays attention to those things.
That's it.
Yeah.
No, that's been part of the brand prior to the acquisition. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I will be incredibly sensitive and fix that immediately.
Well, I'm waiting for my confirmation email because I signed up and I didn't get my confirmation email yet, so I could offer an editorial suggestion. But am I allowed to do that if I haven't bought the book yet?
Yeah, you absolutely should. Once you're in, I don't know if you can do it before you're in, but
yeah, I'm not, and I think it's not in my spam folder, but
if you're previewing it might not let you.
Yeah, friggin' Gmail. Is not it's not coming through.
Speaking of cloud providers, blame Gmail.
I have a hate relationship with Google.
Right. So you mentioned Route 53 and a couple other technologies from Amazon on AWS. I assume that any other Amazon technologies that you talk about are more or less as they relate to CloudFormation, right? Not necessarily covering them in depth. There's other books for those.
Yes, very much so. There's a really great book that Manning has called Amazon Web Services in Action, and it's by this guy, Michael Wittig, and his brother, whose name, Andreas, I think. And that's a very, very good AWS book in general, and it talks a little bit about CloudFormation, right? Now, if you've never used some of the things that I'm using as examples in this, because they're very important building blocks for AWS, like if you've never done auto scaling groups, or, I'm using the classic load balancer. Now, chances are, if you've done anything with the web on AWS, you have used both of those, right? Potentially. But if you haven't, you're still going to succeed, and you'll learn about those things too, right? I will describe them and what they do. They all have, both of those things as really good examples have just like a million settings each, things you can tweak and change, right? And
1 million settings.
Yeah. I feel like those settings in some cases are easier to understand when you use CloudFormation to make them, right? Because they're sort of organized in a better way, as long as you have an example template that describes it, right? And I'm talking about versus doing it on the CLI or doing it from the console, right?
I have to admit, when I started out, I mean, I've been using AWS off and on for years, but when I really started to use it for work and actually building workloads in the last year and a half, you know, I'm exclusively CDK now, but I started off doing CloudFormation, but I found that in order to really understand what I was doing, because it was my first time doing an auto scaling group, first time really using a load balancer, I would build it manually through the console first, just so I kind of had it's like I needed a mental map in my head about how the pieces fit together. And then, you know, like, okay, figured it out, took notes, delete everything, and, you know, build it up with the templates instead. And I felt better understanding, okay, it's doing this, it's doing that.
Yeah, I absolutely did that too. And whenever there's something, you know, that I've never touched, that you know, I need to bring into the mix of something I'm working on, I still do the same thing, right?
Yeah, and it was hard to find sometimes documentation on some of the more arcane concepts, or sometimes it's like it wasn't that arcane, but I didn't have the right words. Like something you talk about in one of the chapters is the concept of resource signals, which, you know, if you're deploying a fairly complex web application with EC2 instances and a load balancer, and you want to make sure that the application's working before you cut the group over, resource signals are essential. But like, that was a missing piece for a long time, because like, I knew I needed that, but I didn't know what it was, and I kept running into contradictory information.
And that's,
I wish I'd had your book.
Thank you. That's actually, remember, you know, a few minutes ago I was talking about one of the things that, you know, somebody who knew probably more about CloudFormation than I did, one of the reviewers, that was one of the things, the way I described it, they really liked it, you know, because it's very opaque when you're like seeing it, even in the AWS documentation, you know, it's basically, you know, you can do these things, right?
And you read the documentation and you're like, I mean, that's great and all, but let's assume I don't already understand how this works. You know?
So I really tried to be the bridge between, you know, the here's what it can do and here's how you do it, you know. So cool.
That's good.
That's great.
That's a good way to approach that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right, so we've danced all around infrastructure as code, but we haven't really defined sort of exactly what that is. Now, I imagine that a lot of our viewers probably already get that. They already know what the term means. But you want to give us a high level? What would you call infrastructure as code?
Sure. I mean, I guess the textbook definition at this point is that it's bringing you know, modern software development practices to infrastructure. So, you know, obviously, you know, some of us here that we were talking about, you know, Sunboxes and Unix machines earlier, you know, we used to build our computers and add hard drives to them and do all those things, add memory. And then along came virtual machines, which, you know, virtualization created a certain ability to automate certain aspects of that hardware and software. And then tools like the configuration managers and Ansible, Puppet, and Chef came along and let you do a lot of things with what's installed on the hardware and software initially. And then now we've, you know, obviously with VMware and all the things that they've done, you know, they dramatically accelerated the automation of the hardware and software, but you still need to go in and plug in drives and, you know, spend $1 million on storage and do all those things. But the cloud really made possible addressing all this stuff with code, right? But it is, for the most part, it's declarative and not procedural, although the CDK is kind of bringing it back to procedural to a certain extent, although it's kind of a hybrid, I guess you would say, right? Because you end up with the declarative code. That's a
good point, though, because you are writing.
Yeah,
you're writing what amounts to procedural code, but you've got to be a little careful about that.
Yeah, you got to be aware of what they're,
because it compiles down to declarative. So if you're relying on stuff executing in a certain order, it may not necessarily.
That's for sure. It probably won't, actually, in many cases, right? Yeah, I mean, that's the other interesting thing about CloudFormation is there's a little less information about how it does what it does out in the world than most people would like, if that makes sense, and the order in which it does things. But there's enough so that you with experience can succeed, greatly. But it knows when to deploy things other than things that you need to make it wait for, right? Which we talked about, the signaling. Mm-hmm. And when you get into the modularization of templates, also there's a lot of rules that come into play there. There's 3 different ways you can, and that's what Chapter 5 is about. There's 3 different ways you can make templates modular, and they each have sort of pros and cons, and you might actually use more than one of them in a single project. You can input and output from templates. You can nest the templates. You can, do transforms to plug code into templates. So, and then now increasingly people are just going crazy using serverless things, to address. I mean, they've been using serverless for quite some time with CloudFormation, actually, but now it's becoming sort of standard. It's hard to find templates sometimes that do sophisticated things that don't use serverless. So I hope that answered the question that you asked, Nathan.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say, to summarize, infrastructure as code at a very high level is defining your infrastructure in a way that it's templatable, that it's a thing that you can reproduce quickly, regardless of what tool that you're using. So speaking of tools, and this is just a question that I have because of the way that I like to run things, the way I like to manage things. So CloudFormation is very much, as you mentioned, an AWS-specific thing. Do you have any thoughts on whether you should design things like this, infrastructure as code or services in general, so that they aren't necessarily dependent on a platform like AWS, maybe using a tool that's a little more agnostic?
Yeah, well, like we discussed earlier, Terraform is immensely popular, and it's cross-platform. Although they just, I haven't really even figured out the details of it, but they now have this whole new suite of things on AWS, which is really interesting. It's super popular on AWS. But yeah, I think there's total validity there. I think it's the one thing I would say is that I think that hybrid cloud and on-premises is something that's going to be around for quite some time, right? And although I talk to people all the time in my job who are like, hey, I've got this old compellent storage system and it costs like $1 million and it's going to cost, and I need, I'm running out of room on it. I'm thinking about moving to the cloud instead, right? So the economics are starting to be there for putting 200 terabytes into the cloud, right? And they weren't there, 3 or 4 years ago. You would go out and buy that storage device, right? But having said that, hybrid is going to be there. So you need a tool that can support both of those things. And you can use CloudFormation with Terraform, although, I haven't done a lot of that myself. I have used Terraform on some projects, but mostly using things that other people have written and tweaking them. There's this Pulumi thing, which does what the CDK does, and it's platform agnostic as well. But so that's that part of me. So now I'm also working at my job with Azure a lot, and we're starting to use the ARM, which is basically like CloudFormation. It's also, although I think it may have hooks to on-premises, I haven't played with that. And I'm not sure I'd call it the equivalent. I don't know how equivalent it is to CloudFormation. CloudFormation's certainly been around much longer, and there are many more products and services on AWS than there are on Azure today, although Microsoft is running very, very fast to catch up.
I don't like when people eat their lunch. Microsoft.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it doesn't happen too often.
No,
so
but they were
late.
late.
They don't know how to react.
They were late to this game. I mean, most people, I guess most vendors were late to this game, except for Amazon. They kind of invented the game.
That's right. So what I would say about that is, the more I switch contexts and go over to that side of things and then come back to AWS, obviously I've been working with AWS longer. It makes me feel terrible about the poor people who are trying to build hybrid cloud, right, with more than one platform, whether it's GCP and AWS or Azure and AWS. I mean, it's just an incredibly hard thing to do, right? Even if you have a platform agnostic tool, right?
Yeah, I feel like what it forces you to do is limit your tool set, right? You have to limit it to something that's common across all of the resources you have available.
Yeah, and look for commonality.
Something like, OpenShift, either, the upstream or the commercial version of an OpenShift type thing.
Right.
Well, so what I mean is if you're writing code for AWS that leverages a bunch of AWS services, and then you try to just port that over to Azure, and Azure is missing a handful of those services, then even if you were to translate the template over, it's just not going to work.
We call that Amazon's competitive advantage.
Yeah, right.
Also known as vendor lock.
Yes, vendor lock-in, which is the thing we've talked about in the past. So, I mean, if you were to take a step back and say, I ignore all of those extra features of AWS, and instead I'm going to, containerize my application so it will run anywhere, right? Then, sure, you've got a portable application, but it might not be the least expensive way to run it on AWS. Might not be the least expensive way to run it on Azure. It might not be the best way to run it on either of those services, but it is portable, right? So there's trade-offs. That's all I'm getting.
Yeah, like Java was supposed to be. Also, the AWS specific services, I think they're Amazon getting back at Microsoft.
Maybe.
For when Microsoft back in the 90s made the IE specific formatting tags, aren't they the ones that came up with the blink tag in IE?
I don't remember.
I'll show you.
I mean,
yes.
I don't know, but let's blame them anyway.
But I remember the browser wars, and I remember when I think you're right. Microsoft had a special set of tags that only worked in their browser.
Yeah, well,
tried to convince everyone to use them, and
I had a team.
Now Amazon's getting back at them.
Yeah,
I worked on a team where we had a really big bank as our customer, and this is in the mid 2000s, and they were using IE6, right? And they insisted that our very ultra modern JavaScript interface work with IE6, right? So we stripped out, we spent months making our interface work with IE6 to make this bank happy, and then shipped it, and they were really happy. They had 36,000 employees, and they were all going to use our system. And no one from that bank ever logged into our system using IE6, ever.
Of course not.
It's like just a quarter of just doing nothing but nothing.
But you did what the customer wanted, right? And that's all that matters.
Exactly. And so I guess,
And I assume they paid you handsomely for it.
Well, they just remained our customer.
Oh,
you know?
okay.
So, which was big. That was a big deal. Meanwhile, I go to this other gigantic company, and they're complaining about the performance of our software in IE7, right? And Chrome is here at this point, right? And we're taking advantage of everything it can do. You know, we've got this JavaScript website, and back in the early days, and it was an application, and it did things, and so this very important customer, he's like, this seems really slow, and can you tell me why? And you know, he's using IE7, and we're like, well, do you have to use IE7? And he's like, no, but some of our applications use IE7, so I have to have it, and that's why I use it. And we're like, well, if you use Chrome, our system will be a lot faster. And he's like, that's all I need to know.
Simple as that.
I could use Chrome if I wanted to, so I'll live with it being slow because I just don't want to switch browsers. You
don't want to switch browsers. You can run multiple different browsers at the same time. I'm doing it now.
I do it every day.
It was
It's like the dish detergent. You're soaking in it.
Yeah,
what?
right.
I did not want to continue the conversation.
No, I can't say I blame you.
Yeah, right. Sometimes it's best to just walk away.
Yeah.
Okay. Pat him on the head. Okay.
All right. So this has been a pretty good conversation. Unless you had more you wanted to add, I mean, do you want to just cover one more time how people can find your book? Also, do you have any other books, or is this it?
This is it. I mean, I have written a couple of other books like
so far.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see. It's a lot of work, I'll tell you.
Okay.
But it's been fun. I've learned a tremendous amount. It's been great interacting with people, and so yeah, I hope it's really successful for Manning, and it's great. So you can get it at manning.com/books/AWS Cloud Formation in Action.
And there is a link for that in the show notes, folks. So, and I also linked it in the chat because Josh was asking about it. So if you don't want to write all that down, you can find it in those two places.
Yeah, and I'm on LinkedIn if anybody wants to connect or anything. Chuck Gehman, and I will. I'm on Twitter, Charles Gehman, actually. So
MySpace.
Yeah, how about MySpace?
No.
Live Journal. I keep trying to convince Nate to get us our Live Journal presents, and he keeps refusing.
Yeah. I have to sign up for this Discord thing I just found out about.
Oh, yeah.
With that.
Good old Discord.
Teenagers.
That's just for gamers. Ignore that.
Okay.
Discord's actually baller.
Yeah, no, Discord's not bad.
The gaming industry are his customers. He needs to be all up.
Yeah, no. I mean, to be honest, it's if I had known in high school, right? If I had known that I could have had a future as a professional gamer, I would have put more time into that instead of learning this Linux thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, really.
Dad would have been so pissed.
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't have worked out for the first 10 years of my career, but still.
No. It could have made you homeless real quick, I think.
Could have made me homeless.
That's right.
So, at any rate, I think, this has been a very informative interview, and if you want to give us, if you want to get me your Twitter handle, I'll put it into the show notes if anybody wants to find it that way. We can also look up your LinkedIn profile and throw that in there if people want to connect with you. Otherwise, like I said, there's a URL to where you can find the book on Manning's website, and we have that code, which is also in the show notes, pod IronSys20, and we do have some codes for a limited time access to the MEAP run of the book. So if you're very interested in it, reach out to us via the usual channels to reach out to Sysadmin, and as long as we still have codes left, we'll give you one of the codes.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and transition on to our waiting screen, you guys. We'll be back in a few minutes, and then we'll get on with the rest of the show.
Yay!
Thanks, guys.
All right, folks, and we're back. Chuck decided he was going to take a hike for the night just because he's had a rough day, or a long day, I should say.
Or I drove him away with my singing, and he just didn't want to hurt my feelings.
That's
We don't
totally
know for
what
sure.
it was. I guess they're involved in the company he works for is involved in a virtual conference, and those are a decent amount of work, so I can understand. So, here we are back. I don't know how much I have for announcements other than the usual patron update, so I'm going to read through our patrons quick, as usual. The list has been updated since last time. So we've got a new patron, Solemn, I think is how you pronounce this, S0L.
I would say that's Solemn.
Solemn.
Yeah. That's lead speak for Solemn, and I approve,
right.
by the way.
Totally. Erwin, Trooper-ish, Linux X666. Maybe it's Linux Sys666.
It's Linux Sys666.
Yes.
Sorry.
Linux.
It's hard to say.
It is. It's hard to say because all the sixes
You think
and
he
the
does that on
sisses
purpose?
and the X's, it's totally on purpose. He's sometimes in the chat, so if he's in the chat, you should tell us. Is that on purpose? gimpyb, Ryan, tuxpreacher is also a new patron.
Preach!
Marc with a K, DeMentor, John, a.k.a. John the Nice Guy, Marc with a C, Julius, Andi, Jay, Charles, and 22532. So thank you to all of you for being part of our Patreon, because it's really helpful, and it is going to buy us that mixer, I swear.
22532, or as his friends call him for short, 2.
So, at any rate, the mixer that I want to buy that I've talked about in the previous shows is like a $500 or something mixer that incorporates a bunch of the tools that we use on the show, like a soundboard and multiple audio inputs, and it's all digital, and it'll basically up our sound quality a bit. And I'm like $120 into it, so we're getting there. It might take a few more months.
I'm looking forward to it because my hope is that you'll actually use the soundboard more than the self-referential every so often. Yeah, we have a soundboard. Here's Marvin.
Yeah. So we totally have a soundboard. I don't use it as much now because the OBS stuff makes the need for it less interesting or less important. But I'm going to go ahead and I don't even have it set up at the moment. I didn't unlock it or anything.
Oh, well.
But there was supposed to be a kaboom.
There was supposed to be a kaboom, and there will be as soon as the soundboard opens on this old-ass Android tablet I use.
Where's the kaboom? There was
as a
supposed
soundboard.
to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
Good job.
We've also got the creepy organ, which is fun. Charles is like, I've heard all these before, because I never changed the soundboard, and that's part of the
I
part of
thought
the
we
reason
just
I don't use
had
it much.
Marvin and Homer. I never even heard the toccata
Nope.
and fugue.
There's totally the creepy organ. In fact, it's labeled as creepy organ on the soundboard because I didn't know what it was called.
Toccata and fugue in D minor, I think.
Okay.
Or is
Yes,
it
I
D
think
minor?
that's right.
It's definitely a minor key because it's sad.
Yeah, I just know that it's been used in lots of like horror movies and whatnot. Maybe not horror movies, but
Also at the
suspensey
beginning
movies.
of Dark Castle on the Macintosh, which was an awesome game.
Oh.
You ever played Dark Castle? Yeah.
Interesting.
I could never get into organ music.
No,
Nah.
I was raised by an Episcopal family. Organ music was a big part of my
So
life.
was I.
Yeah. Yeah, most Americans don't like to eat organ music. They prefer like, the regular cuts of meat.
Yeah. Yeah. A little trim.
So I neglected to check Apple to see if we have any reviews, so I'm doing that quick. We probably don't.
No, unlikely.
Nope, still no new ones. Last one was in March.
But Massimo Yezzi, who's an old coworker of mine, and I feel comfortable saying his name because he used his real name, said, "Thanks, guys, this was great." And he might still be on here. I don't know.
That's
so
awesome.
I'm going to count that as half a review at the very least.
I'm glad it was great because.
So, Mass, if you could give us a formal review, that would be awesome.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I guess it counts as chat engagement if we don't actually say anything in chat, but we see what people are saying in chat and then talk about them while recording live.
I've totally
We've
interacted
had
with the
chat
chat today.
engagement.
Yeah.
Yes.
We had the whole Shrek
We
thing
had
going
the whole
on,
thing
too.
about onions having layers and cakes having layers and ogres having layers.
Wait, that was a Shrek reference?
Totally.
Yeah.
So listen,
I haven't
folks.
seen the movie.
if you're-
Ogres have layers. Ogres are like onions. Yeah.
What about parfaits? Parfaits have layers.
Learn something new every day.
Yeah. So one thing that you might have just learned if you only listen to us on the recording is that, yes, you're missing part of the entire whole multimedia experience. If you're not watching us live because you're not seeing our pretty faces and you're not able to interact in chat.
Interact with the chat. So,
I mean, we still love you if you're listening to us on your iPod,
absolutely,
in your Subaru on the way to your job.
Why's it got to be a Subaru, Mark?
I don't know. I threw them in, well, and they're using an iPod, so I think I threw them into the late 90s, early 2000s. Well, actually, the 2000s.
An iPod and a Subaru. You have this whole like scene in your head, don't you?
It's a lovely scene.
What color's their hair?
Their hair is kind of dark because they haven't aged and it's not falling out yet. But they're working at a job where they have to wear a tie and go into the office every day, so they're miserable.
So slowly dying.
But they'd rather be
doing iPod.
They're slowly dying, but they'd rather be going to the office every day because they married who they thought was going to be the love of their life because she let him take advantage of her in high school, but he realizes he's trapped in a joyless marriage with 3 kids, and he's just totally dying.
But he does rebel a little bit. He does rebel a little bit. He wears khakis. He wears khakis. That's right.
No. He wears cargo pants when he's supposed to be wearing khakis.
Yeah, I wouldn't be allowed to get away with that. You can't wear cargo pants and a tie. You get called into HR for that.
That was totally me when I worked my first job. When I was in tech support, when they made us wear freaking button-down shirts and ties. My only rebellion was that I always had a snarky t-shirt under my button-down shirt and cargo pants.
Wow. When I had to wear ties at Merck, I would get crazy ties, some of which I still have, like the Dinosaurs of the Lost World and M&M ties and all sorts of stuff like that. A tie, remember ties that were a fish? Basically, it looked like there was a fish like
the fish tie,
going down the front of you.
The fish tie.
Those were awesome.
I have a tie that looks very professional, very like a thatchwork almost pattern, but when you look really close at it, all the little thatches are Jeep grills. That was one of my favorite ties.
So rebellious.
Not rebellious, but
it's a little rebellious.
Favorite tie. I have a tie with Obi-Wan Kenobi on it.
Ooh.
All right, so anyway, I don't have anything in the way of reviews because I didn't see anything. I did just check iTunes. Like I said, nothing there. So, folks, leave us reviews so we know what you like and what you don't like. Maybe you just like everything, and that's why you're not leaving reviews. You just want us to leave it the way it is. So that's fine, too, I guess.
But, Mass, thanks for the kind words, bud.
Absolutely.
So good to interact with you in chat today.
Speaking of chat, anybody have anything cool going on? I see, Mark, you put something in the notes here under chat.
I did.
About Steam?
Yeah, my son was all excited today. I had a long day at work, so I wasn't really paying attention to the whole rest of the interwebs. But Josh is like, it's the Steam summer sale. And then he starts texting me. He's like, I've got like $60 worth of stuff in there, but I haven't pulled the trigger yet. And I felt judged because he's like, I'm going to be like that guy who has, hundreds of games and only plays 6. I'm like, now I'm feeling judged, man. He's like, I wasn't talking about you. Yeah, but that's like me.
That's kind of how I've been treating Stadia.
Yeah.
So like every month with a Stadia Pro subscription, they basically give you games. There's a handful. Sometimes it's 1 or 2. Sometimes this month there was like 8. And so of course, if they're free, all I have to do is click the button that says claim. So I've been claiming every free game. Most of them are games that don't even look all that interesting, but I'm claiming them anyway because they're free.
Right. I've got many of those on the Epic Games Store, and I'm looking at my Steam wish list right now, and like half of it's lit up, maybe more than half of it. And I'm like, wow, that's a great price. And then I realize, yeah, but am I ever going to actually play the damn thing, much less install it?
Right.
Why is it on my wish list? So if you're the type of person who just likes to unlock records in Valve's database, the Steam summer sale is on now. Are there achievements for that?
Yeah, probably.
What I haven't, there are 2 games. Well, okay. I don't know if I'm embarrassed or not, but I'm up to 290 hours in Animal Crossing New Horizons since March 20th.
Wow.
Right.
That's a lot of hours.
290 hours. Yeah, I've played it a lot. I swear that game saved my sanity during this pandemic. In my defense, and I shouldn't need a defense, in my defense, I can play it with my kids. And when I say my kids, my youngest is 17 and my middle daughter is 23, and she's actually graduated with a master's degree and is in week 2 of her new job. But when we were in the pandemic situation, it saved all of her sanity. So that's been fun. But other than stuff on the Switch, I bought a HOTAS last week, the flight stick with the throttle.
Oh, okay.
Which I've been playing Elite Dangerous, Internet Spaceships with that.
Internet Spaceships.
And Elite Dangerous in virtual reality with a HOTAS, it is so flippin' cool.
That sounds like the perfect combination.
It is.
I've been very aware of the fact that VR is very nice and very cool, but in some ways it almost feels gimmicky. But for a flight sim, that's perfect.
Well, and so my one ship is a mining vessel that's got like a cockpit that's almost, it's like a 200. What would it be like? Imagine like you take a sphere and you cut it in half up and down, and then you take the one half of the sphere and shove it on the nose of the ship. So you got your view out the front and forward, but you've also got your view below the cockpit, and like you look down to your feet, and there's like space and asteroids and shit, and you look up and the cockpit's fully rendered. And it was actually, I was doing a mining run the other day, leaning back in my chair as my drones were collecting the rocks, and I just look up and there's an oh shit handle hanging up there. And I just subconsciously reached up to grab it. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not real, but it looks so real. Like
That's
my
pretty
brain
cool.
was fooled. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It is cool.
I played around on a friend's VR setup, I guess about a year ago. I'd never used one before. And, I went through just a couple of different games, but there was one where you kind of walk around the world and you could fly. But, I went to the top of a building where you could walk out onto this ledge, like 50 stories up. And so, I've done it and I'm walking. It's like, and intellectually, I know that I am in my friend's apartment. My feet are on the ground. But I got to this ledge and it's like I could take the next step. Couldn't do it.
Yeah, right. I bet because
I literally could not
your
put
brain
a foot forward.
Your brain is tricked into thinking that you're really on a ledge.
Yeah, it was real enough that just which was incredible.
I toyed around with Google's Dream VR when I got my first Pixel phone. It's not quite as immersive as that, but it is pretty neat, I'll have to say. Where I mainly used it for like panoramic photos that I had taken, because there was a point where I was taking a lot of these like sphere pictures with my Android phone, and I was able to go back and review a bunch of those, which was really neat. It was almost like you were reliving it, but obviously it's a still picture, right? You can't interact with it. There's no noise. There's no anything like that. I can only imagine how much more immersive it must be when you have all of that as well, all the elements that make it feel more realistic.
It's insane. And when this pandemic nonsense clears up enough, you should totally come and check my setup out here.
Yeah, we talked about that before all this happened, and now we've been unable to do so.
Nonsense. The other thing I've been doing is one of the other TAMs turned me on to Rock Galactic.
Okay.
And I give that 5 out of 5 drunken, violent space dwarves. It's a laugh riot. If you like co-op shooters at all, it's spectacular. So think dwarves, like dwarves from like fantasy, with Scottish accents.
Yeah.
But it's like the future, and they live in this mining station, and there's this planet with all sorts of different biomes.
Why do you got a stereotype like that, Mark?
Right. And there's a full beer system, which is not only gets them drunk but buffs them. And then they have amazingly violent weapons because while they're doing their various missions, they're attacked by bugs. So think like Starship Troopers level of crazy violence.
Starship Troopers with drunken dwarves. This sounds perfect.
It's hilarious, and it's got the best co-op multiplayer drop-in I've ever used.
That's cool.
So like if I see that my buddy Fakundu and the other guys are playing, I can right-click on him in Steam and select join his game, and I will drop pod into his session if there's like an open slot, because you can play with four dwarf squad.
Yeah.
And it'll drop me right where his mission is, and I'm there, and I get all the rewards and everything, and they're happy because now they've got another dwarf to kill bugs and
That's cool.
and do the objectives. And it's very well done. It's got its tongue firmly set in its cheek, and what's not to love about dwarves yelling "Rockenstone" while doing all sorts of crazy space dwarf things.
I see you already have that in the show notes, so that's cool.
I do.
Deep Rock Galactic. That's cool. So
it's on Steam.
So Charles, you want to give us an update on how your pandemic cycling is going?
Well, as Nate alluded to, about 3 weeks ago, I had a pretty nasty bike accident. I'm recovering, but lacerated my chin, broke my arm near the elbow, skinned up a bunch of stuff. It just kind of generally landed on the right side of my body and made it unhappy with me in various ways. But I'm healing.
Wow.
So I'm walking now. I'm not biking. No biking for a few more weeks. Cramped my style a little bit, but honestly, it's gotten so hot out. I don't know if I could have kept up the 10 miles a day or not just sweating through everything I own.
Wow. 10 miles is a decent bike ride.
Yeah, so that's a bummer. Though it's been interesting to navigate the healthcare system in the time of a pandemic when you do not have said pandemic. But it's the first question that everybody asks you. It's like, have you had it? Are you being tested? Have you been exposed to anybody? Take your temperature everywhere. And
right.
Like they ask, have no family members accompany you into the into the doctor's office or whatever, because they just don't want
they don't want
they don't want any more they don't want any more people in there than necessary. But it's obviously there are exceptions. That first night when I crashed, I couldn't really walk particularly well, and so Liz was pushing the wheelchair around the urgent care as they started to put me back together. But otherwise it's all right, but I have to imagine that for a lot of people, having to navigate some of these spaces by themselves it's kind of tough.
Yeah, right. My as we talked about before the show, my mother-in-law recently had surgery. It was follow-up surgery to surgery she had before the pandemic, and she just came home today. But the weird sort of rules that had to be followed for visitation while she was in the hospital and dropping her off, and normally this goes like someone accompanies you to the hospital, and then you sit there in the waiting room until they're done, and then when they're done you get to go visit them in the recovery room, and then you get to go sit with them in their room, right, and make sure everything's okay. All that's axed. You basically it's like you kick them out of the car on the curb and you leave, because that's what the hospital wants you to do. They don't want any exposure at all to you or anybody other than the person they're operating on. Right, and it's all very weird. It feels very weird. So yeah, I don't know what that's going to look like on the other side of this. If the hospitals in general are going to be changed, or if once this particular pandemic has passed, we go back to something more like it was before. I don't know, but
I don't know. I mean, I've been over at the big Lehigh Valley facility in Cedar Crest, and the whole waiting rooms, check-in areas, they've all been completely reconfigured. New partitions and whatnot, just try to stop people from bunching up.
Yeah, it's almost funny, right? Not this whole situation, but as businesses are starting to allow, like restaurants specifically, are starting to allow you to come and take curbside pickup. A number of restaurants just basically use their existing dining area. They rope off all the chairs and tables and whatever, and they make you a little path up to the counter, and you pick up your food and you leave. Well, the Chinese restaurant here in town, I don't know if this is a trend for other Chinese restaurants. They were closed for about a month at the beginning of all this, maybe 2 months, where other restaurants were open for pickup, they were not. And I thought that was kind of weird. Even if you tried to call them, it was nothing but a voicemail that said, due to concerns over the health risks of coronavirus, we're closed. And I'm like, oh, well, that's unfortunate, whatever. When they reopened, they had built a pickup area at their main door, They literally put up walls and like this big plexiglass. It's like walking up to the ticket counter at a movie theater now. Just the Chinese restaurant. Every other restaurant in town just basically said, "Okay, we're going to rope off everything."
Yeah.
And, whatever.
The place near us here in Easton did that.
Really,
they were
did the
closed
same
for a little
thing.
bit, and they built a pickup window. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So I wonder why that's a trend.
Well,
Is it a
well, and I
cultural
remember-
thing? Like, are they
well, I
more used to
remember-
this in Asian countries that they were just ready to do that?
Well, I mean, Asia certainly had the experience of the SARS epidemic, and we
Yeah.
really didn't. But
Right.
I don't know. But that's something I remember is like in February and March, before the shutdowns, Chinese restaurants were already taking a fall off in business. Because China, coronavirus, not that it had anything to do, with the Chinese restaurant in this country, but they were already
Right.
starting to see that that effect on their business. So maybe it's their way of showing that they're taking it seriously. It's sort of a PR effort.
Could be. Yeah, there is sort of a
I'm not-
negative stigma with Asian cultures right now. No
And I'm not
thanks to
sure-
current leadership.
I'm not sure how legit this is, but I had heard that at least a lot of the Chinese restaurants regionally here get a lot of their supply out of New York, which obviously was hit hard
Yeah.
earlier. than
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So that could have had an impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So on the exercise front, I've talked for several shows now about the fact that my wife and I have been running, and we're still doing it. It's good. It's actually like, I always feel like any sort of exercise routine, you'll be like gung-ho for a week or two, and then if it lasts longer than that, it becomes a habit.
Right. You got to do it long enough for it to be a habit.
Right.
And then you got to just, like, I didn't go on my walk one of the recent days when it was like armpit Vietnam level heat and humidity.
Yeah, right.
But I definitely, I definitely kind of felt it a little bit.
You like miss it, right?
You do miss it because it does a few things. It definitely makes my blood sugar lower. And it gives me more calories I can eat in yummy stuff.
That's important.
It is important because
yeah,
I like to eat.
We've been running, like, the program we're using, this Couch to 5K that I've talked about.
I've heard of it.
Suggests three runs per week, right? You run, like, we've been doing it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they have a definite program lined out. Well, we're coming to the end of the program, and on several occasions now, we've decided that outside of the program, we've taken extra runs because we just generally enjoy going out and doing it.
So what are you going to be able to run a 5K?
So the program is laid out that it's all time-based up until a certain tipping point, and then it says, run this many minutes or this many miles. And we're not up to the pace.
Or miles.
Right. Well, so we're not up to the pace yet where the number of minutes they recommend is also the number of miles. So basically, they expect you to be running at a 10-minute mile, and we're just not there yet. We might be able to do that, but I think it would be very tough on my wife, she's getting much better at running, but she doesn't have that conditioning yet. So we're taking it easy. I don't want to give her reason to not like it by being pushed.
Right, you don't want to drive her off.
Right, and it's not like we're training for a marathon or something, so I don't really care how far we go. You know what I mean? I care more about getting out there and getting it done and having the sense of accomplishment that goes along with that. So yeah, we're up to almost 2 miles at this point. And the program, if we were to equate the minutes to miles, would be closer to 3 miles. So we're not at the pace that they think we should be at. But it's not like it's, whatever. It's a reference point, right? So I'm hoping that once we're done with the program, which will be like next week, we can just go into our own sort of routine, which will get us there eventually, So that's kind of what I've been up to. And my Jeep is still broken because I'm waiting on parts.
I got one car. The Volvo needs to be inspected, but I barely have fired the thing up. Like I'm due to drive it around the neighborhood again. I wonder if it'll start when I go out to it in the driveway.
Yeah, so mine, I forget how in-depth I talked about this on a previous show, but basically I had a bunch of engine work that had to be done. Seals that had to be replaced and whatnot. I feel like I've talked at least to you about this because that's how you reacted when I said it.
Well, when someone says seal, I bark. So I mean that's.
But the three things I needed to replace, which in themselves are not all that difficult, required that I disassemble a whole bunch of things just to get to them, right? So I decided, since I'm not supposed to be going anywhere anyway, now's a great time to do that. Well, it's been a month and a half now.
Hey, I need to contact tech support about aligning this printer that I had the replacement part before I left for vacation in March.
Yeah.
And here we are in friggin' June, and I haven't dealt with it.
Right. So in my case, I have the three things that I wanted to replace replaced, but when I was disassembling things, there were these bolts in the exhaust that I had to take out, and anyone who's ever worked on a car knows that exhaust work always sucks, because exhaust heats and cools and heats and cools and heats and cools. Everything gets all seized up, everything gets rusty, everything gets just like nasty. So I decided, since I was able to get them out, but they were difficult, I'm just going to replace these bolts. So I go back to Chrysler, who was making the Jeep at the time that I guess they still are technically, but they're owned by Fiat now. I went back to them and said, I need these bolts because they're kind of specialized. They don't make them anymore. Apparently Chrysler has this thing where they don't make parts for vehicles that are over 10 years old. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So I've basically, for the past 3 weeks, been hunting around for Mopar parts dealers that actually have these things in stock, because that's essentially what you have to do once they're discontinued. There's probably a stock of them, a huge stock of them, but that's slowly dwindling. And at this point, that's 5 years ago that my vehicle was 10 years old. So it's been a bit of a hassle. I got half of the parts that I need today. The other half are on their way to me. So hopefully by this weekend I can start putting my Jeep back together. And then I'll be very happy that I'll have my Jeep fixed. So I'm sure a lot of sysadmins care about that. But maybe you can at least relate to the concept of being stuck in the middle of a project that you can't finish, whether it's a car or something else. It's a little frustrating.
Sometimes there are just no shits to give.
All right, so I guess that means we can talk about the news, right?
The news.
I don't have a flashy transition screen to get us to the news, unless I go to the waiting screen and back again, but that would be silly.
That sounds silly.
So I'm just going to play our old transition music like I did last week. Here we go. You know, it feels so much more natural when I can hear that music.
It does.
When I play it through OBS, I can't hear it, and that's really frustrating. I have to figure out a way to make that work. It's all about entertaining us, folks, not you. And we're entertained by the music.
He's not wrong.
Well, no, I think that's... So, I don't know if anybody noticed, but I like drew a blank when I went to introduce the show this morning, at the beginning of this show. And that's because I usually have the cue of the intro music to follow on to. And now I can't hear it. You guys can hear it on the stream, but I can't hear it here. So I'm going to have to, like, play it in my earphone or something when I do that from now on, so that I have the cue. It felt very disconnected. I don't know. I don't like doing it. But anyway, we're here to talk about the news. And some news from this week, or yeah, I guess it was just earlier this week, is that Apple... Oh, so this article's from 9to5Mac. Surprise. It's about Apple. It's from 9to5Mac. Apple is switching away from Intel. So I don't know how many of you remember, but maybe 10, 12 years ago, Apple switched from, what were they? They were Motorola based. What were they? RISC processors?
There's PowerPC.
The original Macintosh in 1984 used the Motorola 68000 chip.
Okay.
Then with the Power Macs, Apple switched to the PowerPC, and the PowerPC could emulate the 68K family. And then the big thing was Crapple going to Intel.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
I can tell how you feel about that.
There's a whole generation of people that think that the Mac has always used Intel, and they're wrong.
Yeah, so
But-
I
that's
was saying the last Power PCs were G4s, G5s.
Yeah, you're
I
probably
believe so.
talking before
We ha-
2010. I don't know when they switched over. It might have been.
I remember when it happened because I was doing desktop engineering at that time, and on the one hand we were like, thank God, because it meant we could, for a lot of our computer labs at the college I worked at, we could get Intel iMacs and put boot
dual
camp on them.
Windows. Yeah.
Yeah, and just dual boot Windows. Both sides are joined to AD, and we didn't have to have redundant labs. That being
Right.
said, for the Power PC systems that we still had, they very quickly became second-class citizens because you could just watch support for Power PC vanish.
Yeah.
Like nobody was maintaining software for it
Right.
anymore.
So apparently what we're going to see now is the same transition again, except now it's from Intel to ARM. So
announced.
anyone who's
Sorry.
familiar with mobile architectures know that ARM is generally used as a mobile processor. Apparently it's come far enough, and we have another article about this tonight, which may floor some of you. It floored me when I read it. But apparently ARM has come far enough along that it can be used as a desktop processor now, and that's what Apple intends to switch to. And the article on 9to5Mac is basically about some of the reasoning behind that. They posit, or maybe suggest, I don't know if this is validated anywhere, but they suggest that the reason for this was due to a lot of the issues in the Intel Skylake processor. So the title of the article is "Former Intel Engineer Says Skylake Problems Were the Turning Point for Apple's ARM Mac Transition." So, sorry, both of you were trying to say things while I was saying all that. So go ahead, get your thoughts in.
So I'm gonna do a sub bullet. This is the wiki article, and I know it's Wikipedia, which anyone can edit, but I just vetted it. It's good. This essentially gives the tale of the Macintosh processor line.
Oh, you threw it in the notes. Okay, so
I threw it in the notes.
That'll be in the show notes, folks.
So Mac OS transitioned off of PowerPC in 2009 with Snow Leopard. Prior to that, it could run on Snow Leopard, or it could run on either PowerPC or Intel.
I thought it was around 2009 because that was when I went to the college that Charles is still at, and that was around the time I remember this switch. But it was also around the time when I first got real exposure to Macintosh systems, because I was never really a Mac fan, but in higher ed they're very popular, right? So at any rate,
you never knew the predecessor to OS 10. You never knew
No, I
Mac
did.
OS prior to BSD.
I did because of the
Oh, you
role
did.
I worked at, the ISP I worked at. When I was in tech support, I had to support those things. And it was a platform I wasn't very familiar with, so I forced myself to learn them via a couple Motorola Macs that they still had there. I don't think they were even PowerPC Macs. They might have been They must have been PowerPC by then.
Not necessarily. They could have been running the.
I want to say I had a 68K Mac on my desk. It was a very old machine, but
Was it black and white?
It was not black and white. It was color.
Okay.
But anyway, I do remember like the blue colored G3 Macs and the G2 Macs. So yeah. Anyway, yes, OS 8 and 9. I'd seen OS 7. I don't think I've ever seen OS 6 before.
System 6 and System 7.
Sorry, is that what they were called?
They were called System. They were called. It was called System 7 up through System 7, and then they called it Mac OS 10.
Well, there
I
was
must
an
have
OS,
used a fair number of
there was
of
an 8
them
and
in
9.
high school or middle school.
I do remember
I
8
would
and
use-
9.
Yeah,
That's what we had.
I forget whether it was System 8 or System 8 and System 9. I think it was. They didn't call it Mac OS until
I thought they were
Mac
calling
OS
them,
10.
I thought they were calling them Mac OS 8 and 9. I could be wrong. Well, whatever. The point
I'm old. I could be misremembering stuff.
the point here is that this article is all about this guy they were able to interview. His name's, I guess you pronounce that Francois?
Francois.
Francois. I think that's Francois. I'm not going to try to pronounce the last name because I'm going to butcher it more than I might butcher Francois. Says that this person was a former Intel engineer, and he basically said that Skylake was so horribly managed and horribly tested and horribly just dealt with from the beginning that Apple has decided we're not going to stick with Intel now. We're going to go with ARM.
Well, Intel's been shitting the bed for years now with
They
the
have.
side channel attacks and everything.
Yeah.
Like, Intel, you had one job. One job!
Yeah, make me a CPU that isn't riddled with security holes. Okay, here's Skylake. Oh, shit.
And by the way, it was classic Mac OS up through 9, and that's where then once they switched to the BSD based kernel, that's when they started Mac OS 10 as we know of it today.
So they were calling it classic Mac OS before OS 10 came out?
Once OS 10 became a thing, they called it classic because
Okay.
it existed as an emulation layer.
I remember OS 9 and 10 existed in parallel for a short amount of time, and I think that's when the classic moniker came out.
Yeah, because OS 10 had it as a compatibility layer because everybody had to rewrite their software to use the new, because it was essentially then the world's prettiest Unix.
Right.
One could still argue that Mac OS 10 is the world's prettiest Unix.
Maybe.
Potentially. At least for it could be considered the world's prettiest Unix for the least amount of effort. How's that?
There you go. I would say that. You can
tweak the heck out of X on a Linux box and it can look gorgeous.
You can run OS X and not even know it's Unix or Linux. Well, I guess it is Unix technically.
It is Unix. It's all BSD.
Yeah, it's based on BSD.
It has nothing to do with Linux actually.
Right.
Different init system and everything.
At any rate, this article is
like,
all
shut up.
It's all full of conjecture about why they left Intel. But the bottom line is Apple's leaving Intel. They're going to go with ARM, which I think is actually kind of an interesting move.
That is interesting.
Well, I mean, at least a lot of open source software already supports ARM.
Raspberry Pi, right?
Yeah, Raspberry Pi is ARM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I haven't had trouble getting packages for the Pi, so I don't think this is going to be. Well, and the thing is, like, for those of us who are still, I'm going to have this Intel hardware for a while, but Intel's still got a huge install base, so I don't think it's going to be as disruptive as when Apple stopped supporting PowerPC, and if you still had PowerPC architecture, you were screwed because there was like nothing that you could run on it.
Sorry, we're all busy responding to chat.
Well, I'm flexing because I used to be a Mac guy before the hipsters took it over.
Before the hipsters. I was a Mac guy before it was cool to be a Mac guy. Doesn't that make you a hipster?
No, because I didn't hang out in a coffee shop with it working on my screenplay.
Okay.
What if I complain about the way every other release of OS X broke Active Directory support?
Wow. Screw Active Directory.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but if it's what you got.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Like, how hard is it to make a freaking directory service?
Except when you don't got it and then you decide to implement it. I'm not bitter at all, though. Moving on.
Yes, you're right. We should just keep using Samba as a domain controller. What could possibly go wrong?
I didn't say that was better. Just being clear.
It's IDM, man. Free IPA.
Listen, we had Novell and we pitched it. I mean, come on. What was wrong with us? Anyway.
Nothing. I mean, that's what you do when you have Novell.
So, moving on. This is from what appears to be a local news station, WCJB? Channel 20.
WCJB!
It's an affiliate of ABC, apparently. So, Google introduces fact-checking to image search. So, in a world full of social media fake news, I guess. I hate to use that buzzword, but it is really kind of what it's boiled down to, right? Google has now decided to start applying a fact-checking service to Google image search results. So much like when you're on Facebook and that little thing pops up at the bottom that says that this may not be true, now you'll be able to see that on Google image search results instead of just Google text results, which apparently it's already there for Google text-based results, although I've never seen it, I don't think. So it does make me wonder if they're going to start returning results that are more factual if they're getting fact-checking, right? Almost makes sense, doesn't it? So if I want to be able to find my lies, it's going to be harder.
Yeah, and then you get into the whole argument of, are these third-party fact-checking organizations, are they biased? Do they have an agenda? All that stuff. Also, this article is 6 sentences, and 95% of the webpage are crappy ads.
It really is.
Betty featuring boobs.
Yeah, it really is.
Some real, some animated. So yeah.
Be careful looking at this article.
On WCJB.
So listen,
Gainesville, Florida.
I've noticed this.
The excessive boobs. It's Florida.
I've noticed this on a lot of smaller publications, especially things that used to be magazines. It's like they were floundering to keep revenues up when magazines started to die.
Yeah,
this obviously isn't a magazine.
That article.
What's that? Sorry.
I'm closing the article. I don't need to be flagged as looking at porn. Okay.
There's totally no porn here.
Eh.
My browser must be blocking it because I don't actually see those ads.
There's actually not really porn. I'm just being...
I would hope not. Listen, these are legitimate news people, okay? There wouldn't be porn. Maybe innuendos. Maybe almost porn. But not actual porn.
Yeah.
Anyway, this article comes from Microsoft, which you probably won't find any ads that feature boobs. Let's look and see. No, I don't see
That's kind of sad to me. No, but there's...
Unless Microsoft's having a day.
Yeah, right.
There's some happy IT folk who are busily working in various clip art.
Indeed. So,
stock photos.
I could be wrong in the reading into this headline that I'm about to do, but it sounds like Microsoft is trying to extend. They have a program called Security for All, perhaps, in which they're trying to better platform security. Am I wrong here? Anybody?
I don't follow Microsoft enough to know all their marketing buzzwordy things, but it looks like they're using the Window Defender technology, which is they provide that with Windows for the past couple of versions, so you don't actually have to buy a malware detector, and it works pretty well, I think.
So this feels like an extension to them trying to better platform security. I could be wrong, but the article's headline is Microsoft continues to extend security for all with mobile protection for Android, which basically, they've got another security offering for Android users. There are other offerings on the Android platform for, security and sort of app scanning and analysis to try to help make sure that your device is secure.
This looks like the thing they already mandate. I forget what we use at the Hat, but it looks like the thing they mandate that we use on personal devices already in that same swim lane.
Okay. So the reason I included it was simply that I feel like Microsoft is doing a better job now than they ever have for endpoint security. And this is just one more piece to that puzzle, right? So it used to be when you had a Windows machine, you were almost required to go and pay for some extra software to protect it, right? And then there were some free alternatives to that, which were never... they might work, but they had ads built into them and all kinds of stuff. Their goal was basically to go and get you to pay for, for another product that was somehow bigger and better, or maybe just didn't contain ads. And now Microsoft is making a pretty valiant effort to make sure that it was just the Windows platform was protected by default by incorporating their own antivirus, which is the Windows Defender that you were talking about, and malware detection and protection. And now they're trying to extend that to other platforms, which I think is a good thing. You can argue about the quality of Microsoft software all you want, but the fact that they're trying, I think is actually kind of a good thing. I don't know if it mentions in here if this is a free tool or if you've got to buy it or not, but I know Windows Defender is free with Windows, so this could be the same case. I don't know.
Included is what I would say.
Yeah, it's included with Windows. So, at any rate, you can now run Microsoft's malware detection thing. Do they say what it's called? Microsoft Defender ATP.
TP. You down with ATP?
What does ATP stand for?
Yeah, you know me.
It sounds
I don't know,
like...
That's terrible because, we use the acronym in the first sentence. Let's see if we can find them expand the acronym. Do they ever expand the acronym?
They say
These
they've
dumb
got it for
shits
Mac.
never expand the acronym in the article. So let's look at the Microsoft Defender ATP Tech Community. Maybe that expands the acronym.
No, maybe it's not an acronym and it's a word they've made up.
It's all capital letters.
It's an all capital word they've made up.
My inner English major is furious at Microsoft right now. This might be the fattest code, the sweetest
Dear
code on the
Google.
Galaxy, but the fact that I don't know what this acronym means is driving me nuts. Well, that's one of the things that drives you crazy at any company. I hate that at Red Hat.
So
People start hurling acronyms around that they assume I know.
Yeah, I know, right? So we have an index of acronyms, so you can translate the acronyms, right? That was the thing that I was introduced to during my onboarding, and it's like the the freaking page, the index is like 40 pages long. It's
and what's worse is we have overloaded acronyms.
Yeah.
So the acronyms are contextual. It's like C.
Right.
You've overloaded the expression, so you might blue screen if you use the wrong acronym.
So this is funny.
That was a programming joke for those of you who didn't get it.
Anyone who's familiar with the security industry, or even some fringes of the security industry, know that there is an acronym called APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, and it's thrown around as any threat that you just, like, if you can't defend against the thing, you just call it an APT, right? Oh, it was an advanced persistent threat from an advanced actor that was targeting us. That's what it means, right? It's like it's a targeted attack that you couldn't possibly have defended against. And in some cases, yes, that's valid. And in other cases, it's just IT people trying to say, like, I couldn't possibly do this or I'm too lazy to figure it out. So now Microsoft has made Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection. That's what ATP stands for.
I found it by Googling.
That's what I did.
ATP.
That's what I did. I Googled it. Advanced Threat Protection. So it's almost like, it's like, was this by accident, or did they take APT and change two of the letters so that it would look somehow familiar to security professionals?
So I don't know if anyone listening right now, either live or on the recording, works at Microsoft, but yeah, learn how acronyms work. You know, when it's a press release like this, you need to
right. Expand the stupid acronym.
Expand the acronym
Tell us
the
what
first
it
time you use it. That's a standard for a reason.
We don't all know. And if anybody
because you pissed me off, and now I'm not going to buy it.
If anybody from Microsoft listens to this show, I'd actually be impressed. So let us know if you do.
Yeah. If you really love Linux, you'll expand acronyms properly.
Right. And in fact,
do unclemarc a large.
If you work for Microsoft and you want to defend your use of ATP, let me know. You can come be on the show and talk about it.
Woo. Because you annoyed Uncle Mark.
Right. I think that's a funny acronym. I mean, it makes sense, right, in the way they're using it, but I think it's almost contrived.
I shouldn't have to Google to find out what it means.
No, you're probably right. So anyway,
I'm absolutely right.
If you have an Android device
or
apparently an Apple device, that it mentions in the article that they already had this for Apple, you can get a Microsoft piece of threat detection software on your Apple device.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Can I run it on my Linux box yet? Microsoft Hearts Linux. So who likes snow cones?
Do you want to build a snow cone? Come on outside and play.
Here we go for the second time on this show.
I like cherry snow cones. Although the blue ones are good too.
Do you like
Purple's
snow
a good
cones?
flavor too.
Do you like snow cones that are full of data?
I like snow cones and I cannot lie. Anyway.
So this article is from what is this? Analytics in India Mag? Yeah, that's what that says. Okay. AIM. Isn't that AOL?
The Snow family. It knows nothing.
That's a terrible acronym. Or that's a terrible name to use, isn't it? For your data storage.
You know nothing, Amazon Snow.
So Amazon has a new product. So anyone who's looked into moving large amounts of data into Amazon is probably familiar with things like their Snowball, which is like a server they'll send you that's just packed with disks and enough processing power to basically move a bunch of data into it and then move it off to AWS. And maybe there's other uses for it. Maybe you keep it on-prem and actually use it as like an extension of AWS's, S3. Now they have a tiny device they're calling the snow cone, which is in the same family. It sounds like it does a very similar thing, except it's much smaller, and it's meant to be like an edge device. So you can keep this in like a kiosk somewhere, or like in a small office, or whatever, where you need some storage. Looking at a picture of it, it looks like it fits a drive, maybe 2 drives. So I don't know how much this thing can possibly hold.
8 terabytes.
8 terabytes. That makes sense for 2 drives.
I'm reading the article.
Yeah, right. I guess I didn't read that part of the article. I did read through the article to find out what the hell a snow cone
You know
is.
what's concerning me now?
What's concerning you?
concerning me is that edge seems to be one of those, it's turning into like an annoying buzzword that everybody's going to feel they need to use, just like they started to need to use cloud 10 years ago.
Yes.
Now the next buzzword that you're going to have to sprinkle all your conversation with is edge.
So what bothers me, and it even bothers me with some of the messaging that I'm getting from the higher-ups at Red Hat, is that edge always meant like this thing on my desk. This is the edge. My laptop is the edge. This is the very extremity of the network. It is the end point. It is the edge, right? Now, all of a sudden, we're using edge to describe a data center, an on-prem data center, or we're using it to describe small kiosks and things like that. And I don't like how we're muddying the term. It's just me, I guess.
And I've got the extra thing going on in my head. Wherever anybody says the edge, I think of the lead guitarist from U2. Edge, give us a riff, because he goes by the Edge.
Was that his name?
It's probably not his Christian name, but that's you had Bono and the Edge.
Sort of like the guitarist from Guns N' Roses was Slash.
Yeah.
He had it
right.
Slash,
give us a riff.
Because Edge was already taken.
Yeah. So U2.
So at any rate. Oh, now you're gonna look that up?
Yeah, Edge, comma the. Although his real name's apparently David Howell Evans. But...
Well, it's got an E in it. Evans, Edge, it's close.
Come on, Edge, give us a riff.
So at any rate, you can read the article to find a little more information about what this thing does and what the intended use is, but it sounds like it's a tiny snowball. So it's a snow cone. I do want to know if it's cherry, though. I always like the blue snow cones. I don't know what flavor they were. Was it blueberry? I don't think it was.
It was the flavor was blue.
The flavor was blue.
It was something that appeared in nature.
So, on to the next. I don't know if you guys can hear the 6-year-old thumping around the hallway. I'm sorry about that.
It's fine.
I think the 6-year-old was saying, wrap it up.
She's just drunk.
Yeah, right? Wait, no.
Harper, stop drinking.
So, my next article here is from ZDNet, and this is the one I was alluding to earlier. ARM and Linux take the supercomputer top 500 crown. So if you're not familiar with the supercomputer top 500, it's basically a list of all of the top supercomputers in the world based on benchmarks and whatnot. I had a little bit of exposure to this before I left higher ed because I had just started a role as a HPC admin, which, by the way, Charles, I hope you guys are doing well.
I believe we are, actually.
So the top 500 is basically a list of the top 500 supercomputers, I think, in the world. It's not just in the U.S., it's in the world. And what they're saying is that this ARM-based, RHEL-based, so it's valid here, right? ARM and RHEL-based supercomputer has hit the top of that list. It's based on, I think it said Fujitsu's processors, or maybe it's built by Fujitsu. No, it's Fujitsu processor, Fujitsu ARM processors, and it's running RHEL, and it is the fastest supercomputer currently in the world, and that's pretty damned impressive for these little CPUs that were designed to be low power consumption in the freaking computer in your pocket, which is pretty cool, right? So I guess ARM really has come a long way. Not only is Apple switching to ARM, but one of the top supercomputers in the world is also running ARM. Now, I didn't read.
It's a little bit of an arms race,
right?
Huh?
I didn't read deeply enough to see like how many nodes this thing was running and how they were able to get to the top of the list. It could be that they have like 82 billion nodes, and that's how they were able to get the processing power to get to the top of the list.
Maybe.
But
well, it's 48 core. bro, do you even lift? It says it's a 48 core machine.
Look, did either of you even read the articles before we started the show?
No, but I read really fast.
You read really fast.
So I comprehend apparently.
You
bro,
comprehend better than me, apparently.
What I like is that this machine is almost 3 times faster than second place, which is the IBM Summit system.
Pretty cool.
Which makes me happy.
48 core. That does sound impressive. Does it say does it give us any specs on the Summit system? Or is that just you?
It gives us a link to the government website where apparently it's hosted, which I'm now following. It's in Oak Ridge, which means that there's probably evil research going on there.
Totally.
Oak Ridge, Department of Energy's Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Oh my God, they're going to tear open a rift in space.
I mean, 48 core.
Oh, hi, Dan Jacobson. You're sad that Summit's ass was kicked, aren't you? He's one of the guys on the page with it. Bronson Messer's not happy now. Paul Kent is furious. So the Summit, I'm such a dick. The Summit has 4,608 nodes.
Oh my God.
The node performance is 42 teraflops.
There's no way a 48 core ARM system beat that.
Dude, I don't know what it sounds like they're not comparing apples to oranges at this point. But you know what this is running?
Japan?
You know what this sucker's running the Summit?
What?
Well,
if you tell me it's running like SLES or something, or Windows. It's running a Windows machine.
RHEL 7.4.
Oh,
so they
okay.
actually need to patch because they're.
That's it. If they went to RHEL 8, they'd be better.
Well, no, because 7. We're at 7. Did we drop 7.9 yet?
9 is in beta.
So they need to be running 7.7 to be supported. Because 7.7 was the last one with the EUS.
They're out of support.
So guys, you got to patch.
They're out of support. They need to update.
Call me. Yo, call me.
Oh, this says
Give me a ring.
It's running Fujitsu's 48 core A64FX system on a chip. So that's each CPU is 48 cores.
Oh. So how many?
So what was that about how you comprehend better?
You know, in my defense, I've had a couple ounces of bourbon.
Became the first ARM-powered supercomputer to be dubbed the fastest computer in the world. It says 415.5 petaflops.
Sweet.
I'm just going to do a text search for the word nodes and see if it tells us.
Yeah.
Nope. Ain't listed.
Yeah. Nice.
What if I click on this link? Does this link tell us anything?
And you can still barely run modern Microsoft Office on it. It's still dogs.
Yeah, the system has 4,356 nodes at 48 cores each.
Dude, we're going to so accidentally invent Skynet. It's not even funny.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear when the machines rise up.
That's talking about the Summit. What's this one? I want to know how many nodes this one is.
Oh, that was a dumb noise.
Number 3. No, tell me how many nodes this. I guess they're not going to divulge that. Just that it's better and faster.
Nah.
So anyway, there's an ARM-based supercomputer at the top of the top 500 list. So that's neat. I think it's neat.
It's absolutely neat. Let's just not make Skynet by mistake.
I picture like 4 billion Raspberry Pis in a stack.
I do like Pi.
Running 48 core ARM CPUs.
Yeah. Do like Pi.
I indeed like Pi. I don't know that I would like Raspberry Pi for anything other than compute.
No? You've never tried Raspberry Pi? Raspberries are pretty tasty, man.
They are. You're missing out.
I could go into this story about how when I was a kid, my sister and I used to pick wild raspberries.
I think you almost did.
Yeah, which is true.
Is that the story? I mean, that's the whole thing?
That kind of is the story. I can go into all about like where we found them and how awesome
in the woods
was, but I'm not going to bore you guys with that.
Hopefully you washed them before you ate them and didn't eat them with the dog piss on them.
Oh, hell no. It was the 90s, and we were kids.
Oh, so you ate them with the dog piss on them.
You didn't wash raspberries in the 90s.
Oh, great.
You ate them and hoped you didn't die. Raspberries were kind of bitter, if I remember correctly.
That's from the dog piss.
Yeah.
Maybe it is. Maybe it's from the dog piss. Are you suggesting the dogs piss on raspberries? Is that it?
I mean, I mean, they're low enough to the ground. If a dog is walking by, it's going to lift its leg and pee on the bush. I have dogs; they pee on everything.
They
I
do.
was gonna say, have you encountered dogs, Nate? Like, I don't own dogs, and I know this.
And it's Pennsylvania. I mean, there's dudes pissing on them probably.
Just
Come
dogs
on.
everywhere.
If you're a guy and you're out in the woods, you're not going to run back to the house to take a leak. You're going to just pee in the raspberries. And then you and your little sister came along and ate them.
Maybe she's actually my older sister, so you've got it wrong.
Your
already,
older sister. Well, yeah.
So anybody that's trying to gather information about Nate, you now know I have an older sister, but I won't tell you how old.
They're going to be able to crack your biometric information and access all your records.
Please, all they have to do is try to become friends with me on Facebook and realize that I hate everybody on Facebook. And then they'll see a link to who my sister is, because that's how Facebook works. At any rate, our last article for the night is from CNN Business, and it's basically one of these stupid articles where they're talking about how, the new version of iOS copies Android. So you know what? I'm feeling too crotchety to really talk about this that much. Basically,
well, as discussed, I haven't read it.
iOS is implementing a couple features that let you do things like, I don't know, alphabetize the apps on your home screen, the way Android does it in their app drawer. So obviously they're copying Android. Even though when you run an iPhone and you install a new app, it's a freaking cluttered mess, and I think they're just trying to fix that.
If you're too dumb to make folders, which is very easy. Mine's not a cluttered mess.
You are correct, but if you don't create folders...
If you're too dumb.
It doesn't organize them in any way. It just throws them there, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, if you're too dumb to make folders. And you can label the folders with names.
Hang on.
I've got 2.5 screens of stuff.
There's a fine line between dumb and lazy.
Well,
you might be too lazy to make folders.
Karen spends enough time on her iPhone every day that she can learn how to make folders.
So, at any rate... if you want to believe CNN Business,
I have no sympathy.
Your iPhone is going to be more like Android with the iOS 14 update. I think it's a bunch of hyperbole.
I think getting obsessive about phone operating systems as if they're actually important is kind of silly.
It really kind of is. At any rate, that's all the news. I've closed that tab now. I'm not going to talk any more about it because I think I don't even know why I included that. I should have just dropped it from the news. In fact, I'm going to make a note.
No more phone shit.
I should have dropped, if I could type.
We could talk about security stuff around phones, but...
Well, we did. Microsoft, totally. With the ATP. So if anybody wants a very strong and very tasty beer, you should get this thing I have on camera that if you're not watching on the live stream, you can't see.
Does it have raspberries in it?
There's no raspberries in it.
That's sweet baby Jesus crap again, is it?
No, it is not sweet baby Jesus, but I still contend that is not a bad beer, even though you and Ken and lots of other people that you know hated it. I liked it, damn it.
I could go on the internet right now and find 30 people to say it's bad.
Maybe I could find 30 people that say it's good. Microsoft did phone security through obscurity, is what Trooper Ish says.
I knew a guy who had a Windows phone. I still know the guy.
Did he hang himself?
No, he's alive.
I knew someone that insisted it was the best platform, to be honest.
Actually, I knew 2 people. You know somebody who had a Windows phone.
I owned a Windows phone right before I came to Red Hat.
There, see?
I actually loved it. It was a nifty interface. It was a nifty interface, but it was funny because, like, Microsoft was in the same position that, like, Apple and Linux had been in for years. And those of you are like, what do you mean Apple? Apple's so popular. No, for a long time, Apple was single-digit market share in everything.
And they still are.
But, yeah. But the Windows Phone interface was actually pretty quality. I mean, it was crappy as Windows 8, but as on a phone, I liked it. But the fact that there weren't a whole lot of everything was either pushed out like on Karen's iPhone or Android.
There's more people who had Windows phones than like Sweet Baby Jesus.
That could be true.
The Windows Phone of beers.
Look,
Maybe.
they still make the thing, so obviously enough people like it that you know. Anyway, this is from Evil Twin. They make a beer called the Imperial Donut Break, which is like a 12% beer that is an imperial stout with chocolate and coffee, and it's actually really tasty. But I couldn't find it. But they have this other one called the Imperial Biscotti Break, which is the same beer except it's got vanilla and coffee. It's actually pretty good. I like the Donut Break better though. But this is like 11.8 or something instead of 11.5%. So, you know, it's a one beer kind of beer.
I liked my Johnny Walker song "Ice" that I drank while playing D&D the other night. That was good.
I actually had one of these while gaming the other night too. I only have one left. They only come in a 4-pack. I'm sad.
Yeah. Sergio.
Freaking Sergio.
I let him get away with giving the guy the amulet that had the illusion on it, and he slipped it into his pouch. You guys could have walked out of there.
And then he screwed up. Freaking.
Let me be clever bard and avoid combat. Also, Sergio,
and then initiate
starts
combat. Freaking idiot. So, at any rate, folks, in case you haven't guessed by our rambling about beer and Dungeons and Dragons, that's about it for tonight. So thank you for...
That's the sign?
That's the sign. That's the sign. So thanks for watching live. If you decided to stick with us live, there's 5 of you, according to YouTube. Maybe 2 of those are Charles and Marc here, but I don't know. But
probably.
We had quite a bit of interaction in the chat, which is great, and we appreciate that. So if you don't usually watch us live, we've actually, for 2 weeks in a row, been pretty good about going live on time for a change. So you should check it out.
Because I nag him because I'm German.
That's totally it.
So
listen, if Charles wasn't able to make me on time for all the years that I literally directly worked with him, you're not going to have any chance of it, Marc.
I'm going to try. It's something worth trying and failing.
I tried hard.
Yeah. So I don't know if we agreed to give a sneak preview of who's going to be on.
Oh, we totally left that out,
episode.
didn't we?
We did. We have a great guest coming in July. We're super excited. You don't want to miss our next episode.
Yeah. So if you have decided to stick around till this point of the show,
or are listening to the recording, which we kind of have you captive in that case, because usually when you're listening to a podcast, you just keep going because you're busy driving or something, right? So we've managed to work out somehow to get the CTO of Red Hat to come on the show next time we record. So July 9th, I think, is the date. We're going to have Chris Wright, and he's going to be on to talk about, well, maybe we'll leave all
that
sorts of nerd stuff.
Yeah, kind of all sorts of nerd stuff.
It will be nerdy. It's going to be
probably the best way to go about that. If you guys don't know Chris Wright, I mean, just go look at some of the presentations from Summit, and you'll find him. He's the guy with a beard very similar to mine. So.
Yeah.
Which, again, if you're not watching live, you're like, what? What beard? What does Nate's beard look like?
It's super exciting because if we screw this show up, both Nate and I could probably get fired.
We totally could. We have to make sure Chris looks
he's
good.
Like executive level almost, right?
He's
CTO,
the CTO.
Chief Technology Officer.
He's got a C. He's got a C.
Part of
at
that
the beginning of his
C-suite.
title. C-suite.
The C-suite. Yeah.
C-level
He's a great
executive.
guy, though. Great guy.
So, it should be a good show. Hopefully.
Well, it'll be a show anyway.
It'll be a show.
One way or another.
Hopefully an awesome show. So we may be in over our heads, or maybe it'll be awesome. We'll see. So, folks, again, thanks for watching live. If you've watched live, thanks for sticking with us. If you're listening audio only, or if you've watched live, because it's been quite a journey on this show tonight.
Indeed.
If you would like to watch us live, just go find us on YouTube, youtube.com/Iron Sysadmin Podcast, and subscribe and turn on those notifications so that you'll know when we go live.
Slam that bell! Slam that bell!
Slam the bell! No, it's smash the bell.
Smash the bell. Okay.
You must not watch enough YouTube. It's smash that bell.
Okay.
Is the word it is. So you can also find us on pretty much anywhere you would normally find podcasts. On Apple. What do they call it? Apple Podcasts now, or Stitcher, or Google Podcasts, and probably anywhere that syndicates those places. If you want to follow us on social media, you can do so by looking for Iron Sysadmin on
IRC,
on
Live Journal,
no,
MySpace,
on Facebook or Twitter,
GeoCities,
Facebook or Twitter,
CompuServe, AOL.
My gosh, yeah, you can look us up on Archie.
Archie!
I don't even remember what Archie was all about.
Get me a beer,
I
Edith.
just remember that it exists. That it existed. And don't forget that you can support us financially on Patreon if you would like to do so. And then you'll get your name read on the show. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be in the credits at the end of the show, which I've now figured out how to do, which is something you're going to see very shortly. So good night, folks. And I hope you guys have a good week, or good 2 weeks until we record again.
Yay.
Good night, all.
Yep. Catch you next time.
Peace out.